Sweet sticky buzz, all sing to say, smoke me away. Green sticky weed for you and me. Time floating by, Christmas while high. Hark how the bud, sweet sticky buzz, all sing to say, smoke me away. Green sticky weed for you and me. Time floating by.
Hello and welcome to step 1 of making vitamin cannabis, or the Phoenix Tears, or the Cure. In front of me here, I have everything you're going to need for the first step. We have some Everclear. If you cannot get Everclear in the state you are in, a high quality, high proof clear vodka will also work. But if you're in a state that has Everclear, this is the magic stuff. We have an ounce of cannabis, as dry as possible. Sometimes you get it from the shops and it's a little wet. You definitely want to make sure that the cannabis you're using is as bone dry as possible. We have 1 glass jar, been cleaned before, no residue, no funky musky smells, just a normal clean jar. We have a pair of gloves, and we have a salad spinner with a lip. And this lip is a key part, so when you're getting one of these, make sure that it has a lip on it. Alrighty, so now we're ready to start the process of making the cure. Okay, anyway, we'll save the gloves for another part here when they're actually a little bit more needed. Nice living in a medical state where I can walk into a shop and legally purchase the cannabis that I'm about to use here. So we've got an ounce of cannabis. Really, really good stuff, okay? This is the buds, this is not trim. You know, this isn't the top colas maybe, but this is definitely good quality cannabis. I'd be more than happy to smoke lots of bowls of this. So we're gonna take the Everclear. If you want to, you can pop off the little seal to get a more even pour. Oh, now don't cry, because even though this cannabis is being totally saturated with alcohol, we're going to end up curing someone with it. And that's far more important than getting high while on a ski lift up to go snowboarding. Though some people might disagree with that. So we've covered almost all the cannabis with the Everclear. And as you can see, it's already starting to strip the cannabinoids and the oil from the cannabis. So now we're going to aid that process a little bit by shaking it up. There's a lot of bubbles that form while you're doing this. Some of those bubbles are just natural air bubbles. Some of them are actually the THC molecules and the cure that's becoming separated from the plant using the cutting agent that is the Everclear. Get this nice and shooken up here. We're going to say about 5 minutes of a shaking. 5 minutes worth of shaking and you should be good. So now we have the cannabis with the Everclear that's been shaken up. We got a lot of action in there. We can see that it's really bubbly. It looks like there's going to be a lot of good quality oil. We're estimating we're going to get between 3 and 5 grams of cannabis oil out of that ounce that we just used in here. So it's not a lot of oil, which is why it takes 1.5 to 2 pounds to get you a full 60 gram reset. Now you can see we have the mixed up cannabis with the Everclear in the jar. We're going to add in a coffee filter, a couple more coffee filters, a funnel, and another totally clean glass jar. Notice I have one coffee filter underneath, and then I have two up top here. That's just because these coffee filters aren't totally covering the funnel. If you have a right-sized funnel, it'll be a little easier and you won't need this secondary filter. But the reason I'm doing this is to make sure that none of the plant material ends up in my finished jar of the oil. So we're going to pop this open here, give it another good shake. And we're going to start the pour. So the pour can take a little while as the coffee filters filter out the plant material. As you can see, we're getting a greenish golden liquid that's coming out of the bottom here. And we're being very careful to not get any of the plant material into this oil, because when we go to burn off this oil, the plant material can cause temperature fluctuations, all sorts of stuff you don't want. Sometimes the cure making process can be a little bit of a waiting game at almost all the different stages of it. So we're now getting most of the water out. We've got a good drain going, but as you can see, there's a lot of drips still coming down out of the pot. So now what we're going to do to speed things along is we're going to continue to let this drain, but we're going to take our salad spinner with the lip, we're going to take the cannabis, and we're going to dump it in there. I'm going to scoop out every last bit of plant material that I can, because inside here is still a lot of oil trapped inside these buds. Throw the lid back onto the salad spinner. I'm going to spin it. What this is doing is separating the oil from the plant. For those of you who understand biorhythmics, we are doing both directions of spinning. Okay, so let's see how much bonus oil that we get out of this, because before we used this stage, a lot of the Everclear and the good cannabinoids and the good oil were left in there. So let's see how much oil we're really going to get. Quite a bit is coming out. Now keep in mind, this is some of the best stuff for making the oil, because this is the Everclear that was trapped inside the buds, really maximizing the cutting agent effect. I'm going to let every last drop drip into this because of how potent and how valuable this oil really is when it comes to curing someone. So we got most of the oil out of there. We're going to go ahead and see how this is very, very dry, but still a little wet. So we're going to put as much of it back in to the jar as possible to do a second run where we crush up the oil. However, most of the time, the oil that we get from the second batches is not as good and contains a lot more potentially harmful ingredients that the water, chlorophyll, a lot of different things it could be, but you'll learn more about that in the later stages of this. But for now, we're going to go ahead, add in a little bit more Everclear. And on this one, we're going to pulverize the cannabis that's in here. So normally a wooden spoon, but we're just going to go ahead and use a metal fork here. And I do not recommend pulverizing or grinding up the cannabis prior to doing your first batch. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but you know, you're spending a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort to make something. You want to have the cleanest, clearest, purest product possible, and that's what you get doing this first. You're still going to get oil from pulverization and doing the second run, but it may be a little bit different than the oil you get from the first batch. Let that one sit a little bit. So, how are we doing over here? As you can see, it's still taking a while to drip down slowly, drop by drop, into the jar. But looking through our oil, we got a decent color on it. It's a little bit more green than I would normally like, but by the end of it, it'll be solid black. And it's still dripping. It looks like, I hope, that we're going to reach our 3 to 5 gram goal out of that singular ounce of cannabis. So we still have our second batch, the second run, that we're going to continue to shake up and pulverize while we're waiting for the first batch to totally filter. Okay, so we have our first batch here, and it looks like it's totally done dripping. But just in case, I'm going to move it to another jar so that we don't lose any of these valuable drops of cannabis oil. This is our second run. Again, this is the pulverized run, and there seems to be different things that happen with the pulverized runs as opposed to the first pure run. But we're going to do it anyway so we can see and show you the results. Okay, so as we're waiting for the second batch, we have our first ready to go batch of the Everclear mixed with the cannabis oil. So as you can see, when I shake it up, there's a lot of activity going on. That's all the cannabinoids, all the different good, lovely stuff in there. And when we burn off all the Everclear, we're going to be left with just the refined cannabis oil. And that is the Phoenix Tears, the Cure, the vitamin cannabis, the stuff that does what you need it to do. Okay, so we have here 2 different runs using the same cannabis. We have our first run, which is a greenish color, depending on the cannabis that you use, combined with the amount that you pulverize it, you can get very different colors of this liquid. This green is an average color. We'd like it to be a little bit more golden or a little bit more yellow. However, this still looks like there's going to be some good oil in it. The second batch, if you can see, is a little bit more neon green. We believe this is because after pulverizing the cannabis, the Everclear pulls off more of the chlorophyll during the cutting process, giving it this almost neon green type color. From past experience, heavy neon green colors don't yield as much oil and do yield a lot more byproducts in the oil than something a little bit more pure colored. So don't be concerned if you get a neon green color. It just means that you're probably going to need to make sure that you're very careful in your finishing process, and we'll go through all that at the end of this video. But for now, notice the colors of oil. Okay, now we're ready to take the refined cannabis oil that we have here in this jar, and we're ready to burn off all the Everclear that's going to leave us just the cannabis oil. So what we have here is an electric skillet. Notice you can set the temperature right here. Now you don't want to have any exposed flames just in case there is a boil over of this liquid, which if it contacts an exposed flame could be very dangerous. We also have a well ventilated area. You can't see it, but there's an open window directly above me that any potential vapors are going to go right out of. Normally you would want to have a fan somewhere in this area evacuating the air, as fast as possible to get it out of here. However, looking at this, we are not going to be using a lot of oil, so there's not as much risk for a large fire as if you were using a ton of the Everclear. We also have a 400 milliliter Bomex beaker. Bomex, Pyrex, any of these beakers will work. You want to make sure you have a high temperature one. There are some available at the wall places and other retailers. However, occasionally we experience those would break on the bottom under extreme high temperatures. The problem with that is if these do break while you're doing your final burn off, that oil is no longer good. You could potentially have pieces of Bomex, Pyrex, and or just glass, treated glass, in your oil. So you definitely, if you can, want to invest in a high temperature Bomex or Pyrex beaker for this final stage. So we're going to set that on here. What we have here is a laser temperature gauge. As you can see, it has a little red dot. And when I point that red dot, it'll register to me in Fahrenheit what temperature it is on the gun. This is an absolutely necessary part of this process. If you heat the oil to above 220 degrees, it can change the molecular and the chemical structure of the oil. From everything that we have learned so far, we want to make sure that the oil does not reach a temperature above 220 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're going to make sure that doesn't happen by using this. We also have these shot glasses, a Colorado license plate shot glass, and a Take Your Best Shot in Colorado. We're going to go ahead and keep these warming initially, though they will eventually be for the very last and final burn off. We're going to go ahead and put the oil into the Bomex beaker. For right now, we're going to keep a little of it in here because it'll be easier to determine our perfect temperature with a smaller amount of the oil. It will also be a little bit safer for us using a smaller amount of the oil. I can see that we have about 175 milliliters of the Everclear cannabis oil in there. Right now,
at the bottom of the glass, we are showing a temperature of about 122. 126.8 is what it froze at. The temperature inside here will need to get to about 170 degrees, between 160 and 170, for this to start boiling and really evaporating the Everclear. You can do it at a slower temperature, but fair warning, it would take days, if not weeks, to boil off this amount of Everclear at a lower temperature. So we're going to increase the temperature of the skillet here. And so we're already up to about 133. So if you notice where I am pointing this gun, I am hitting about a few centimeters above the very, very bottom. It's also the exterior of the glass. If I point this thing on the actual liquid, I get a reading of about 113.3. So even though when I'm getting a reading down here of now up to 172, the interior temperature of my oil is still just 117.8. So be aware of different fluctuations within the temperatures that you will experience, because at some point the exterior of this glass will reach above 220 degrees, but the interior will not reach 220 degrees. There's a very delicate sensor, and the nicer skillet you get, the easier it'll be to find that perfect temperature. But there's a very thin line in between this boiling off and it becoming too hot. So that is the importance of this gun, is to make sure you're not changing the oil into something different. So we're still hitting about 176 on the exterior of the glass. The actual skillet is over 300 degrees. But still, 179 for the beaker, and inside we're still only hitting 125.3. From past experience making the oil, 160 to 170 inside is going to be the point where we will start seeing bubbles of Everclear evaporating. About an hour to an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes longer than that, we will see the true results of what we're doing here, which is making the cure. So we're showing 226 on the exterior. We have good bubble activity inside there. Do you see that? So the interior is still 158. So right around that 160, 170 point. But as you can see, we're starting to get some bubbles. We have a lot of bubbles coming from this side, so let's get in there and we'll see that.
That's how it is. Yeah, try not to stress out.
So these are the Everclear bubbles that are rapidly evaporating. And there's a strong scent of Everclear in this room right now. If you're doing a large amount of this, you absolutely must have a place for the Everclear to dissipate. So a fan, a strong breeze, above you ventilation. Definitely don't want to be in an enclosed area with all that Everclear, or in a place where if this gets too hot, or if you accidentally didn't filter it properly and you had a small leaf that maybe ended up in your oil, it can cause a rapid temperature increase, which can cause this to boil over, and if you have an exposed flame beneath it, that can instantly catch fire. And that's how I still have the imprint of a cannabis leaf burned into my hand. So this is what should be happening within your oil. You don't want much more than this, but this is a good level of evaporation that we have occurring right now. We're going to get the temperature gauge in here, so you can see that the actual exterior of the beaker is fluctuating between 230 and 240, but when it freezes it's about 230. So when we get the interior, we're still at 165.5. So like I said, between 160 and 170, you're going to have that good burn off inside whatever you're using to burn it off with. So a couple hours of this, maybe less, and we'll be ready to add in more of our liquid to get it down to the point where we have 100 milliliters, 50 milliliters in each of these, or a little bit less, so that we can get it down to the really final stage. So second stage is going very, very well. You can see the tornadoes and the whirlpools of Everclear and Cure that are going on right there in that beaker. Okay, so about a half hour has gone on by, and we do have some loss and some burn off there, but it's just not happening fast enough, so we're going to go ahead and get another beaker going with the remainder of this. We'll dump the rest in there. By giving it a little more surface space, what we hope will happen is it will go by a little bit faster. So right now we're looking at about 225 milliliters in the 400 milliliter beaker, and then we have this 250 milliliter Pyrex beaker that is 150 milliliters full. So this is still our first batch, and we're hoping to get these burned off down enough to the point that we can put them in these shot glasses. So we'll see how that goes. And as you noticed, it brought the temperature down a little bit when I put it into there. So we're down to about 219, 215. It's going to freeze at 207. But on the inside, we're down to 146, whereas just recently, before I poured it in, we were in the 160s. So it'll bring it back up again to the 160s. We'll start to see boil off. Hopefully it'll go a little bit faster, so that we can have this done tonight. So as you can see the second beaker has now reached the temperature point where it is boiling as well. Or bubbling, excuse me. We have good action going on both of the beakers at this point. So if you look in here, we've already burned off several hundred millimeters. The additional surface space that they have assists in the burn off process. But if you can get inside the beakers and see, we have a lot of bubbles, which represent the Everclear burning off. And it seems that the right glass has gotten a lot more olive colored, which is an indication that there's a lot more oil action going on inside. So let's take a look at our temperature gauge. Inside we're showing 165.8 and 164.9. So on the outside, let's take a look and see what we have. We're showing about 226, 234. Remember, this reading is on the exterior of the beaker. This one's even hotter, up to 280, 285. So again, that's okay, because when we go inside, you can see that the actual temperature is in the 165.5. Now, as it gets lower and lower, we're going to want to turn the temperature down, because the oil will not have as much Everclear to mix with to burn off, so you're getting just pure oil. And as it saturates and covers the entire bottom of the glass, it can get too hot. So that is the point when we're going to change and put it into these smaller beakers for our final burn off. Okay? But in the meantime, we're doing very good right here, and we're going to go smoke another bowl and let a few more milliliters burn off. Okay, as you can see, we've reached a pretty good point of boiling, so I'm going to consolidate again. So as you can see, it's getting nice and dark as the alcohol evaporates, leaving nothing but the cannabis oil. We went from that really bright green to dark as oil. It's gonna get even darker. At this point, the oil is ready to be transferred into the smaller shot glasses for the final stage of burn-off. So now we've taken the cannabis oil and reduced it down to a blackish liquid. So now we're ready for the final burn-off. Notice we have a smaller coffee warmer. We're no longer using the larger unit. This is just a simple warmer, and it's going to keep it from going too high in temperature. We have our shot glasses, and we're going to split the oil so you can see it there. See how nice and dark that became, even though it started out that really light green. Get every last bit of it out. Also, we had a lot of Everclear still remaining in it. That was so that we could keep it fluid during the transportation. Obviously, we have changed locations for the final burn-off. It's on. So we have a mixture here of Everclear and oil. We're going to let it burn off for several hours here. And now it's just a game of waiting. So we're getting the dram vials ready. As you can see, we have a lot of action going on inside the shot glasses. All those bubbles are Everclear evaporating, so we know we have a little ways still. The other shot glass is even bubblier, so we still have more time left on it. Here's some additional shots of the oil as it's finishing. So we're just evaporating out all the Everclear, but what's left in there that's liquid is going to be the cannabis oil once all the Everclear is gone. there is the oil. It is super reflective. Sorry. It is super reflective. But that's it. And that magical substance can do a lot of wonderful things. So as the bubbles are getting out of it, we're just going to be left with pure cure. But we're not going to have a lot of it. Remember, an ounce of buds became what we have here in 2 little shot glasses. Plus our second run, which we still have yet to do. Is only getting up to 200 degrees. So that's why these things are good, is because there's no danger of it burning too much. A lot of bubbles in this one, so we're gonna swish it around a little bit, see if we can't get rid of some of those. But eventually they will all evaporate and we'll be left with the oil underneath. So because I live in a medical state of Colorado, I'm able to purchase medical marijuana, and the ounce that I got was $150, including the tax and the fees associated with it. So it's one of the lower end ounces. They go all the way up to 200, 250, 300, and that's for the petrochemically grown juicer weed. If you're talking organic weed, the price range is always in the 300s to 400s. So the Everclear we used was about $30, and we used about $20 in electricity. So already we are $200 in to what is in these small shot glasses, and that's in the blessed state of Colorado, where cannabis can be purchased legally, and so can Everclear. So we're really hoping that we get this 4 grams, because that would mean we got the 4 grams for $50 each, which is reasonable, of course, without the inflated costs due to prohibition. It should be much less than that, but it's just not right now. And if you are in a state where you can grow the pot yourself, that is the easiest way to get the amount that you need to do a reset on someone who is sick, or to take it as a daily vitamin. Shake this up here more and see if we can get rid of some of those bubbles. Starting to bubble up on this side, which means we're reaching the conclusion, and within the next half hour or so we should get down to a point where we can glass dropper it out of there and put it into these 1 dram vials, which you can really only get at the scientific supply store that I know of. So in other areas you'll have to find other things. I found some stuff at some natural grocers and vitamin stores too. So you might be able to look there at like a vitamin store. Even in small towns I've found stuff like this in vitamin shops. So of course they have lids, and we're cleaning all this right now as we're waiting for it to finish, and we'll come back to you when we get a little bit further done. Okay, so as you can see, we have a lot of bubbles in there. So we're gonna go ahead and speed up the process, because there is definitely good oil. but we're gonna help it out here, breaking up some of these bubbles manually. And you want to use a glass dropper, because if you use a plastic dropper, unfortunately the oil will stick inside there and the heat can melt it, so it's not a good combination. So each one of these drops is a little bit of Everclear and a little bit of cannabis oil. And a lot of people make the mistake of putting the oil into the 1 gram vials too early, and then when they reheat the oil, it bubbles over. As you can see, it gets really bubbly. So you really want to take your time in the finishing step to ensure that your oil is as pure as possible. Remember, we started out with an ounce, and look at just the little drops that we're left with, and we're hoping to get between 3 and 5 grams, but we'll see what we end up with. So we're gonna let it sit now again, and some of these bubbles pop, and we'll come back and pop some more manually a little bit later, but we're still at least an hour away from finishing. As you can see, there's still a lot of bubbling activity going on inside the glasses. So when you're doing larger amounts of this, you can make the mistake very easily of leaving in too much Everclear or cutting agent. You want to make sure you take your time in this finishing process. So as you can see, we've gone from extremely bubbly to just a little bit of bubbles. So there's a lot more oil in there at this point. So I'm gonna dropper it a few more times. Okay, we've made it bubble more, so even more Everclear is being evaporated. This one's going really good. You can see a lot of activity, but a lot of oil as well. So we'll let it sit for another half hour or so, and come back and see what we have. Okay, so we're going to get in and see that there's not very many bubbles remaining, but still a few left. So it probably has another half hour. And like someone has just pointed out, I've said that 6 times now. So we started at about 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and we're getting close to 4 a.m. the next morning. So there's a little travel time in between there, but for the most part we've been evaporating Everclear for 8 to 10 hours now, and still not done, but it will be done tonight, and we'll get to see the results. As you can see, it's really looking reflective and oilish inside the shot glasses. It's a real dark color. A lot of oil in there, but still some bubbles and some Everclear. So if we were to put it into the little vials, we might have a bubble over when we go to reheat it to put it into the pills. But at this point it's looking good. We do have that super reflective surface, which I really like. If you look closely while you're making it, you can see the veins in your eyes while you're making it. Okay, so it's after 4:20. And we have good reflection from the oil, very few bubbles. You can just see a couple here and there. There we go. So really reflective surface. There's the dropper in that one, but very few bubbles, just a couple here and there. So it still needs more refinement, And if you have time, you can just let it go for hours and hours more. We don't have the time to leave it at this stage right now. We could cover it and leave it be for the night, but we don't have the ability to do that, so we're going to go ahead and put it into the 1 dram vials. We're going to see that we have about 0.65. Okay, and we're about 1.05, which means 1.07. And that extra is to account for the fact we're still going to lose a little bit more. So we can lose up to 7% alcohol from that point. So this one, we'll put it back on there to burn it down a little bit more. Okay, we're going to tare this one. So out of that entire shot glass, we got 1 1/4 gram. It is not looking good so far. Okay, and we'll call that one. See if I can get one more drop out. Okay, so there's our 2nd gram. Tare it. Okay, and out of that one we get about... So overall, from the first run, we ended up with 2.25 grams of the oil. We still have this, the 2nd batch, so hopefully we'll get another gram or 2 out of this, but we might not because it's a very neon greenish color. But as of right now, we're at 2.25 grams. Maybe give or take a little.
So now we're down to the final stages. As you can see, I have the oil in 2 shot glasses and 3 dram vials. So as you can see, I'm using a dropper that you can get at most of your drugstores. A glass dropper. The plastic ones will not work. They get too hot and the oil. You want to spread out the oil as much as possible. So I'm sucking it back in and pushing it back out on the heated surface
and that's making sure that all of the Everclear or the cutting agent that you use is out of the oil. You just saw the shot glasses that have good oil in them. After I pull the oil out, sometimes, depending on the quality of the cannabis used, there's other elements left inside the shot glass you need to be aware of. Inside this shot glass, at the very top, is a residue, a slight clump of material. Though this might be coated in oil, this is not oil. You don't want to mix this residue with any of your oil. Remember, only use a human consumable safe cutting agent if you plan oil. So we have the 2.25 grams of the first run that we did on the oil. But as you can see, if you can see, hopefully you can see, there's little tiny microscopic bubbles at the top of the oil, which tells us that there's still a tiny bit of Everclear left inside the oil. At this point it's had over 10 hours of burn off, so it's not very much Everclear, but we still want to make sure we get as much of it out as possible before we put it into pills. So we're going to do that by going ahead and putting it on this small burner here. As I said, we probably have 2.25 grams of the oil. We will probably only lose 0.05 to 0.15, but that's still enough Everclear burn off that we want to get it all out of there. If you're using another cutting agent besides Everclear, if it's not human consumable safe and you have these little bubbles in there, it can be extremely toxic, which is why we recommend only using cutting agents that are human consumable safe. It's because of those little bubbles that you see even after many hours of burn off. There's still a tiny bit left that we're going to get rid of right now. So we're going to let that do its thing. Meanwhile, we have the second batch of oil and we've refined it down to a shot glass. And we're going to start burning the remainder off of that as well. And we're going to hope that we get another gram out of it in order to reach the 3 gram point for the ounce. It's going to take quite some time to burn off this, but these smaller ones should be ready in about an hour or so. So now we're going to let the heat do its thing. Okay, so an hour has passed and we've gotten most of the Everclear burned off, and it's quite liquidy, our oil is. We have an exterior temperature of about 159, 160, and we have an interior temperature of about the same. We're going to go ahead and get our dropper, and I have a Cap'em Quick pill filler, and I have some these pills you can get at most vitamin stores. They're size 0. And let's talk for just a second about what a drop is. When we are talking about a drop, we are talking about 0.02 grams of the oil. At the temperature that we have, can you get that nice and zoomed in there? A drop can be very thick or very thin. When heated up to the temperature we were at, or even higher, that will affect how thick the drop is. When making the pills, all of our drops are going to be approximate for this reason. Let's go ahead and start. I have some pills lined up here, and we're going to start on the treatment class, which is a T1. 1 drop of oil, 1 drop of oil, 1 drop of oil. For a T2, which is a double dose, 1, 2. 1, 2 drops of oil, and another one with 2. Now for most people, the T class of pills is going to be just fine. But if you need to cure someone, we have the C1, which takes 3 drops. 1, 2, and 3. Go ahead and get a refill over here. Now I'm noticing that even though our temperature was pretty high, these drops are pretty heavy. So even though the T1 is supposed to be 0.02 grams, I'm estimating that these are going to be 0.025 grams. So they're a little heavy. We could heat up the oil a little more and get the drops a little bit smaller. We're going to go ahead and do a C2, which is 5 drops. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we have a C3, which is 7 drops. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and get 7 out there. And as you can see, our 1 gram is pretty much down to nothing and just a handful of pills. See if we can't scoop up every last little bit there. Okay, so now we have a C4. The C4 is going to be your main pill. 4 of these will equal 1 gram of the cannabis oil. So we're going to take 10 drops. I know I don't have 10 drops in here, so I'm going to, go ahead and get some more out here. Got a little splatter there. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So as you can see, the C4, now we're still going to put agave cactus nectar into these pills. Whoops, they're really sticky there. As you can see, that's a pretty thick pill. And then as you go down, you have less and less of the oil. But this is so that you can take smaller amounts or larger amounts as you choose. And again, we have the T class and the C class. Now this last pill is special. It's going to be the Super C. So the Super C is a full ½ gram of the oil, and it is 20 drops. So you can tell already we're going to need some more oil. Gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 on the edge there. $13, $14, $15, $16. Getting really close here. $17, $18, $19, $20. And just for good measure, we're going to finish off what we had in there. Okay. So this is what a Super C would look like. It's almost entirely filled with oil. A ½ gram to be exact. So what you can do now is get a scale and weigh out a pill. So we're showing about 0.1. So we're going to hit the tare button, drop that in there, and we're going to replace this and we're almost dead on, so 0.51. So it should have been ½ gram, and we're at 0.51, so that's pretty good. And as you go down, 0.25, exactly on. So this will get filled with agave and represent a C4. So this one is supposed to be at 0.1875, or on this 0.18. And we're only showing 0.16, so we have a slight fluctuation in our C3. We'll drop in another couple drops. We'll throw this lid back on. And now we're well above it at a 0.20, so a little bit high. Probably should have just done one drop to bring it up to the 0.1875, but it's still within the threshold. And if you don't want to be weighing out each individual one, an estimation will be the way to go. So this would be a C2, which is supposed to be 0.12, and we have 0.12, 0.11. A little fluctuation. I saw 0.12 there for a second, so we're going to say that that's good. It's supposed to be 0.125, and I can get it to say 0.12 for just a second there. So probably just dab the edge of it like I just did there with a little bit. And that gets us fluctuating. Oh, well, we're getting still fluctuating between 0.11 and 0.12. We definitely want it to say 0.12, but if you're making a lot of these, just make up for it in the next pill. You don't necessarily have to weigh out each one. But now we're hitting the 0.12, so we're in the threshold range there. Coming on down the line, down to the C1, which is supposed to be at 0.0625 or 0.06. And it looks like, there we go, our tear came back. We lost it for a moment. And we're at 0.06. It's supposed to be at 0.0625, so I'm comfortable there. You can see the amount of oil that's in it. So coming on down to a T2, which is supposed to weigh 0.04 grams, and we're showing it at 0.05. That is more than acceptable for a T2, so a little bit heavy. So now let's go to the T1s, which are supposed to be 0.02. You can see just a real tiny amount of oil in there. Drop it on the scale. I think we lost our tear there. See if it'll come back. Okay, so our tear is back, and the tear is just accounting for the weight of the empty pill. And these are real tough to get to show up sometimes, so well, I swear there's a nice little drop of oil in there, but it is not registering on the scale. So the second T1 says 0.03, it's supposed to say 0.02. So even though we couldn't get the first one to register, the second one is showing 0.03. So just one drop on the T1s and 2 drops on the T2s. We've completed with the cure class pills and weighed them all out. They're now awaiting the agave cactus nectar, which we'll be adding in using our dispenser. The super seed does not get any agave cactus nectar. However, use caution when using these pills. Patients should not be on any sleep aids or anything else that might slow their heart rate down, because these are serious cannabis medication. Let's go ahead and add in some agave cactus nectar. So there's our C4, there's our C3, there's our C2, and there's our C1. Fill in the T2s over here. And we'll go ahead and throw our lids back on to the C4. So out of a lot of cannabis oil, You could make hundreds or thousands of the T class of pills. These would be great for elderly patients and down the road for testing on smaller patients. The C class of pills takes a lot of oil and you use your grams up really quickly. And in the case of someone who has cancer that needs these, a half a gram can be consumed in the morning, another one in the afternoon, and another one at night. Now that's extreme treatment and trying to do a reset as fast as possible. I strongly recommend not going any higher than the C4s. And for those of you seeking to use it as a vitamin, the T1s and T2s provide you with enough of the cannabis oil to serve as preventative medicine while not giving you the extreme grogginess, though it still can cause some sleepy side effects. Okay, we finished showing you how to dose and how to put it all into the pills. Now I want to show you some common mistakes that can be made. So while we're on that thought, take a look at our second batch. Now remember, this is the batch that we really crushed up the cannabis to make the oil. And as you can see, get it zoomed in there, there is a few areas, especially up top, where there's some black residue that is not oil. I'm going to go ahead and scrape a little of that up with a paper clip so you can see what I'm talking about. So we believe that it pulls a bunch of plant matter out if you crush it up too much. Some oil manufacturers will blend this back into their finished oil. We're going to transfer the oil into another clean container. If you do blend that back into your oil, and make sure you're using a recycled paper clip that doesn't have any vinyl on it. This was a batch of the oil that we received a while back, and it looks pretty decent. However, it doesn't look very oily. It looks almost like a snake, a 4th of July fireworks snake, if you've ever seen those before. So this is the oil that the patient received, and he noticed immediately when he went to do the smoke test that this occurred. So you see it crackling? And then thick black smoke coming and extended flame. So that black smoke definitely indicates something amiss with the oil. So we always do a smoke test and take a tiny bit of the oil and smoke it beforehand, but we're going to show this to you one more time. Again, this is what a batch that has too much of the residue from somebody grinding up the cannabis. So notice even on our second run where we mashed it up, we still found full intact buds, so we didn't really crush it up too bad, because in our experience with the Everclear, if you crush up the cannabis to the point that it's so finite, you get this extra stuff in there, and in the long run, like, that just doesn't look like oil. Some of our oil has looked like that in the past, but definitely this is almost more of a putty, and your oil should always be oily. I'm going to try to see if we can get it to do this one more time. So it's going to crackle and then look for thick black smoke. So there's the crackling, there's the black smoke. Is definitely toxic, so you don't want to be ingesting that oil. And we heard rumors that this batch was made with isopropyl. We're not 100% sure. It could have been made with Everclear and he just ground it up too much, but that's why we're doing this video, and we're showing you right here that if we allowed some of that black stuff at the top to dry and harden, it will become this kind of oil, which is toxic and not good. And it's just either pulling out the petrochemicals in the cannabis, it's pulling out the chlorophyll. We're not 100% sure. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but I do know that you don't want to be breathing in that black smoke from an actual toxic batch. And if you're making the oil and you do grind it up and you do see a little bit of what we call contaminants in your finalized shot glasses, just switch to a clean shot glass like we're going to do here in just a moment, and you'll be able to see the results. Okay, so this is some of the toxic stuff up close and saved and dried out. And this is what we've pulled from inside these little shot glasses. We have a brand new clean beaker. And we're going to go ahead and transfer from the shot glass what looks to be just pure wonderful oil. So the contaminants usually stick to the glass, and like I said, your first run is the best, and we learned very early on, but we were also growing organic weed at the time. We're not growing anymore, but so you can see that there's bubbles from the Everclear, and then there's a little bit of blackness around the edges. That might be plant matter, that might be stems, or who knows what that is, but that is not Phoenix tears. And if you scrape all of that up and mix it in with your good pure oil, you're going to end up with this nasty stuff, and nobody wants this. Nobody's going to get healed from this. It's very difficult to even fix this kind of a batch. So be careful out there. Use your first runs, but you can still end up with something really amazing. And looking at that, we still need to burn off some of the bubbles, but that's going to be about a gram. So we're going to end up right about 3.25 grams out of an ounce of cannabis.
But do you realize that marijuana is not like other forms of dope? You see, it grows wild in almost every state in the Union. Dope? A reefer smoker. Let's go, Jack, on Red Hot.
But green sticky weed, but
Please stay tuned to our newsletter and subscribe to our YouTube for more information. And we appreciate you watching the Vitamin Cannabis.
but